civilian spending, like the use of mercenaries, the use of independent sort of non-military personnel. And you see that in Afghanistan by the U.S. military. I'm just wondering if you addressed that all in your book about how it seems to be like a privatization of the military. I don't know how you want to put it, but just...
Yeah, well, I have a section in the book about the private security.
Oh, okay.
The biggest private security company in the world, privately held private security company, is of course Garda, which is a Montreal company.
Oh, okay.
Has 100,000 employees
Oh, wow.
around the world, right? So it's
Yeah, I haven't got that far yet.
involved in Afghanistan. It's involved in. It's been involved in Libya. It was on the ground in Libya right away.
Oh, okay.
Iraq. So that there's a section on that, and yes, that is it. And the private, I mean, I think the rise of private security is many elements. I think what you said is like absolving of possible long-term costs and that kind of stuff. There's also just, I think, the broader neoliberal ideology that's going on there. With regards to Costa Rica, there's about 20 countries that don't have militaries. Costa Rica being best known one, Panama, Iceland, and most of the rest I think are small like island nations. If Canada didn't have its military tomorrow, there would still be police forces across the country. There would still be the RCMP. There would still be Coast Guard. There would still be thousands and thousands of Canadians with state officials with arms, right? So to eliminate the Canadian military would still, be. So I think that's something to think about. I don't know that much about the people asked yesterday actually in Victoria about the history of how Costa Rica got to get rid of its military. I don't know the history. Apparently, one woman said there's a movie at the Victoria Public Library all about the Costa Rica, a documentary about that process there. The other question you had was regarding
David Orchard
wrote
David Orchard,
yeah. Well, I talk a bit about that in the book. Like the commander in Halifax of the Navy during the Cuban Missile Crisis dispatches Canadian vessels training with American vessels. Doesn't tell the political leadership, nor the Prime Minister, Yves Engler, or the Defense Minister, who I can't forget his name right now. And so, this is
very serious.
Very serious. And I talk about in the book. There's a couple of two different ones. Like I think it's Jack Granatstein that says it. Points out just the seriousness of that. But then I quote a book, maybe it's even two different authors, who basically say this was the right thing to do, right? Which is like that's supposed to be a command structure here, and this is supposed to be a civilian run, but they're clearly in the military world. They're willing to justify that, 40, 50 years later, which tells you a little bit about the headspace of the military world, and how sort of deferent they are to the U.S. And it's widely believed that the Americans tried to get Lester Pearson elected to undermine Diefenbaker, and that was tied into the Bomark missile, nuclear tipped Bomark missiles. That they did a whole process, right? They brought the head of NATO, kind of like in the dying days. It prompts the demise of the Diefenbaker minority government. It prompts them to collapse because the head of NATO comes and starts putting pressure on Canada, and then Pearson changes his position on the nuclear on the Bomark missile question. And I think that all kind of heavily flows from conflict over the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Washington's discomfort or anger towards Diefenbaker not going along. Now, Diefenbaker, I think it's also, we shouldn't be, this is why I don't agree with David Orchard, kind of how he frames stuff, right? Is that Diefenbaker, there was a disagreement over the Suez Crisis in 1956 between Pearson and Diefenbaker. And that disagreement is heavily tied to the conservatives are the pro-British, and the Suez Crisis is the sort of the definitive moment where Canada moves, the Canadian military, Canadian foreign policy, moves from a British line to, okay, we're supporting the Americans. And because the Americans opposed the British, French, Israeli invasion of Egypt in '56, and that's what the peacekeeping mission that Pearson came up with was basically designed to help the Americans, to help the British get out of a disastrous position where they were, Americans opposed what they did, and this was a way to help them out, but clearly aligning with Washington. It was John Foster Dulles' idea with Pearson to have a peacekeeping mission. So Diefenbaker, so there's that political disagreement, but I'm seeing that more in the context of this, are we an appendage of the British Empire, or are we an appendage of the American Empire? I'm not happy with either of those options. Orchard downplays that kind of background history.